Hello out there. Today we're going to just take a quick look at Criterion's release of Carl Theodor Dreyer's Vampyr, a 1932 film that is not a silent movie, but in fact a film with a soundtrack and even dialogue, although it is quite crude, and in fact the movie itself really fares better when thinking of it more like a dream than of any sort of coherent narrative. I believe that is also partly due to the fact that the effort to restore the film was sadly almost a Sisyphusian task, in that they had to cobble pieces of different language versions of the film, and they didn't have access to the original camera negative. Sometimes they had the nitrate print, other times they just had other duplicate prints. So the end result is not one that you would generally say looks great across the board, but up until most recently, when apparently a 4K Blu-ray release was just issued, I believe, of this film, this movie is really the second best reproduction of the film, and I think still works largely due to the fact that the movie itself, I think, is best watched in like a dreamlike fashion. It's very Lynchian. It just has a haunting, ethereal way about it that just sort of envelops you. It doesn't make complete sense, but what's nice about this Criterion release is that there's a bevy of content that you can read into, including the screenplay, incidentally. But it's just a very interesting take, and I want to point out too that the score on the film, Bram Stoker's Dracula, the movie released by Francis Ford Coppola in 1992, cribbed heavily from the score, and it's interesting when you listen and watch this film, when you pick that up. Obviously, Francis Ford Coppola leaned heavily on, work such as this one, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu. I rather enjoyed the aesthetics of that 92 release. And of course, Gary Oldman was more than fit for duty for the part, but that film does have some problems. It's still a good movie, but I think it was uneven. But in any case, Vampyr is a movie not unlike Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and not unlike Nosferatu, that really should be thought of as a seminal piece of cinema that was largely responsible for basically the horror that came decades later. And I think it's a very Lynchian experience watching it. It's not a movie that you can immediately sort of wrap your hands around, but I think to a large degree the sound design, being that it was crude at that time because they didn't have the ability to capture dialogue the way they obviously did years later, but in many ways it's evocative of how a dream unfolds as well. Yes, there's talking in a dream, but usually that's not the most important aspect of the dream itself. It's more there's dialogue, but then there's just imagery and weird sounds, and I just think that's the best way to explain this film. Is it's ethereal, it's atmospheric, and very dreamlike. But the Criterion release, as you can see, has just some terrific literature on the release, and it goes into a fair amount of detail on the production of the film, including the fact that it was, I believe, largely derided by the critics and was a financial flop, despite the fact that, of course, he had also made another movie that's largely considered one of the best silent films of all time, The Passion of Joan of Arc. But as you can see here, the Criterion release, this is a rather haunting Lynchian image here. They just did a fantastic job. And then here again is the screenplay, which I think is helpful when watching the movie. What I would advise people to do is to watch the movie first and then go back and sort of look through this material and then watch it again. It's not unlike Lynch in that repeated viewings offer more fruit. Almost every one of David Lynch's movies that I've watched, I had a hard time, determining just what it was I watched. I mean, inscrutable is a word often used to describe Lynch's films, but I do think when you view them again, there is more to get out of the experience, and eventually you actually come to the realization that there is a narrative. It's just one that is abstract and meant to challenge the viewer in a way that a traditional A to B narrative just simply, that's just not the kind of movie, not the kind of film that this movie is, nor is Lynch's movies. So on that note, I apologize for getting into a little bit of a hoarseness here, sounding a bit like Bill Clinton, but I do hope everyone out there is well. Please stay safe, be kind, and keep watching good cinema like this one here, Vampyr, Carl Theodor Dreyer, Criterion BluRay release. The movie was, of course, issued in 1932. Thanks, everyone.